What's up, everybody? It's Dan, Binder Boneyard, coming at you from the shop. Still trying out these video podcasts that have been going pretty well on the YouTubes. If you do not follow me on YouTube, maybe you should give that a shot. I thank everybody that's been following along, all the new subscribers, the shares, the likes, all that stuff. It's all helpful. I appreciate all you guys very much. A lot of good feedback. Don't hesitate to, ask questions on the in the comment sections. And those of you guys listening at home or listening on your radios or whatever that aren't on YouTube, you can still send your questions in or hit me up on the socials. If you don't know, it's Binder Boneyard pretty much on every platform. I don't do TikTok. I don't do Snapchat or any of that stuff. But so being that I'm in the shop, you may hear some noises. You might hear the heater kick on, something like that. But so anyway, this week has still been a snowy, icy week. The rest of the country has also been underneath a bunch of snow. So if you guys are dealing with that, I feel ya. So that's why if you're watching, I still have this Travelette behind me, which should have went out weeks ago, but because of the weather, none of my equipment will get around outside. I do have chains for one of my forklifts, but it doesn't have the capacity to move rigs around. It's solely for material handling and parts moving, and I just can't get to the parts. Like, we had freezing rain and everything froze to the ground, and it was a nightmare. So that's why stuff in the shop has been kind of moving a little slow because of the weather. I have been driving a customer Scout around to break it in because we'll be delivering it here pretty soon, and it gets around great. And that kind of brought me to the topic for today, which is setting up a Scout for off-road use. And I don't mean hardcore rock crawler. Maybe we get into that a tiny bit, but this is more for the guy with the stock Scout, or maybe is starting a Scout build and has some ideas, but not sure the direction to go. So I think today we'll cover setting up a Scout for various off-road duties. So the very first thing is, like I said all the time, is your budget, your skill level, and being realistic with yourself, what you can realistically accomplish. So being that it's a Scout, and you're trying to build something for off-road, it doesn't necessarily have to get done at a Scout-specific shop. It helps. This is for the guys that are going to pay someone to build their truck. A general 4x4 shop can do quite a bit on the Scout. But, if there's some Scout-specific things you want done, then it's different. But, the first thing, if you're going to start with an early Scout, 61 to 65, 80, which is the fold down windshield, 4-cylinder, 3-speed version. If you want to wheel that one, if you want to use it off-road a lot, get ready to work your butt off. No power steering, manual brakes, the 3-speed with no low gear. Like it's a tough it's tough. I've wheeled scouts like that before, and it's an adventure. You spend a lot of time just try not to break your thumbs every time you hit a rock and the wheel spins around, or you're slipping the clutch all the time because the gears aren't low enough for a hard spot in the trail. Or the other way around, you've got a 152 that's tired, and you end up having to just rev the bejesus out of it to get any horsepower to get through mud or snow or something like that. So, if you really got your heart set on wheeling an early Scout, be ready to either make a lot of modifications or be willing to, wear yourself out. 800s, a little better. They had V8 options, a little bit stronger axles. You could get a 4-speed. It's still a close ratio, so 4-to-1 first gear. But, same limitations as the 80, manual steering, manual brakes, that kind of thing. That's why a lot of people like the Scout 2 for use off-road, camping, wheeling, whatever, because they came power steering, power brakes. 74 to 80s, had disc brake front ends, and you could get a wide ratio 4-speed. So that's a 6.2-to-1 first gear. The best is the 1980s because they had Dana 300 transfer cases. So you could get a wide ratio with a 300 and actually get some decent off-road gearing. So just you have to, pick your machine and be ready to build it accordingly. What I like about the early Scouts is that they're small. They get around good. They fit between things. They, clearance, body clearance and stuff, I like a lot more. They just have a little bit smaller footprint. They have the same wheelbase as a Scout 2. They're 100-inch wheelbase. So what really the difference is the overhang and approach angle that changes them. So, a lot of times if you want to wheel an 80, you really got to consider a drivetrain swap. A lot of guys like the 4.3 Chevys with an automatic and a, Atlas transfer case or something with low gears, so that you have the ease of the automatic with the low gears of a different transfer case. Again, all this stuff costs money. It takes time. It's not an easy conversion. So, you really consider that. Same with the 800s. You start with an 800, a V8 800. Then, you can swap in a wide ratio 4-speed, maybe some low gears in your transfer case, and that gets you some off-road prowess, because that's the whole name of the game when you're wheeling is control. And if you are ricocheting off of rocks, if you are trying to squeeze through obstacles and you're going way too fast and you're slipping the clutch and you're overheating the thing, wheeling becomes less fun. It really does. So, the number one thing, I shouldn't say number one. One of the most important things is control. The number one thing, and I hate to sound like that guy, but it's safety. Don't wheel without a seatbelt. Like, seriously, you'd be amazed how many people hit the trail with no seatbelt. And the other thing is roll bar or roll cage. Like, those two things are an absolute must. I don't care if you're in a stock 80 with 30-inch tires and you live in the flattest part of America or whatever. You need to have some sort of rollover protection and a seat belt to keep you in the truck. A lap belt alone goes a long ways in keeping you safe. So that's important. So then, like I say, control, being able to get through obstacles without being all crazy and out of control. And that comes with having gearing or transmission transfer case that lets you crawl through obstacles controlled. Also having power steering. There's plenty of videos on the internet of guys with manual steering getting through obstacles. And if you watch them, they are working hard. It is not a simple one hand on the wheel, and you're just sawing it to get through it. It is two hands, and they are just paddling back and forth, trying to keep it pointed in the right direction. And those manual steering boxes are not very strong. A lot of the ones on the early Scouts were aluminum, and the internals on them are 60 years old now, and you're just asking for trouble. So I recommend power steering conversions on a lot of these, and not just for wheeling, not just for off-road, but for general driving. Sure is nice to be in a parking lot and maneuver in and out of your spot without having to use both hands and slip the clutch and, try to look over your shoulder and yell at your kids and, all that stuff. It's I know our parents did it, our grandparents did it, because that's all that they had in the 60s. But just because that's how it was then, it's not how it has to be now. So, you might as well upgrade while you can. So, brakes. That's another good one. At least front disc brakes. That goes, again, a long ways. You don't want to be coming down some grade and have terrible brakes. Because, again, if you're ricocheting off of ruts and rocks and you can't get through something, if your transmission transfer case are geared too high and you don't have the engine braking to slow you down going down a hill and you need those brakes, you really need good brakes. So, again, brakes. And, that's great for control, great for safety. Those are real things to consider. And now you're probably wondering why I haven't said anything about lifts and tires. Well, that's because you don't need a lift and you don't need big tires to enjoy wheeling. It definitely helps, but I have gone a long ways on 31s with good gearing, good traction aids like a Detroit locker or an E-locker, and, power steering, power brakes, and just smart driving. If you can get around on 31s, you'll be that much better when you do move up to bigger tires. So, that being said, I really recommend the gearing and control aspects first, because that will make it more enjoyable to use overall. A lift kit, especially on a leaf-sprung Scout and what's available on the market, does not give you the return or performance that you're hoping for that a gearing or power steering conversion or an engine swap or something like that will give you. You don't get the same return because lift kits usually ride rougher. They don't flex as well as stock suspension. All they do is allow you clearance for big tires and to get your differentials off the ground a little bit farther so you don't drag through the snow or the mud. That's your basic off-the-shelf stuff. If you want to the next level, which would be like a spring over or SOA, sometimes you'll see referred to online. I am a huge, huge fan of the SOA. I think, in my opinion, and some people will argue with me, a Scout 2 sprung over with a 1-inch body lift, I know, a little bit of a body lift, and 33-inch tires is the best of all of the worlds. You still have the soft ride of the stock springs. You still get the flexibility of the stock stuff. But you've gained 5 inches of lift by going with the spring over. If you do it right and you do the high steering conversion, so it raises that tie rod above or drag link above the springs and all that, that increases your off-road ability, improves the steering, that kind of thing as well. You run longer shocks, so you end up with a lot more performance and upgrades, but while maintaining a sort of stock suspension orientation and layout. And then, of course, the next level is, coil-over shocks with links and that kind of stuff, which is, crazy expensive, not necessary for a daily driver, not necessary for a wheeler to be functional, unless you are going into that hardcore rock crawler thing, then it might be something to consider. But like my wheeler, there's videos all over the YouTube channel of me and my Black Scout that's just sprung over on stock springs with longer shocks, and I've got 36-inch tires on my Scout because I've sawzalled the wheel wells, and it's a back half buggy now. I go all over the hammers, been all over some pretty heavy duty rock trails with that, and that's more than enough suspension to get through that. Does it go fast in the desert? No, it doesn't. It's made to go average speed and go slow in the rocks. So that being said, we talk about gearing, but I just barely touched on it, but we'll talk about traction aids. There's a lot of different ones out there. There's the factory stuff, which were power locks up until 1971, and then you had track locks from 72 to 80. Track locks are garbage. They break the cases all the time. The clutches wear out really fast. They're not great. Track locks, 1 out of 10 do not recommend. Power locks, on the other hand, are amazing. They are, gear driven. They rely on wheel speed to, apply the clutches. They work well. You can even make the clutch packs thicker so they come on sooner and lock up harder. So power locks I really like for limited slip if you're talking factory stuff. Nowadays, like Eaton makes a True Track, which is a limited slip, great setup. You want something that's an automatic locker that's more aggressive, you're looking at like a Detroit locker. Those are super heavy duty, bomb proof, good lockers, but driving on the street, they're tricky to maneuver because they will lock and unlock when you go around corners, when you apply the gas, things like that. They act funny. So Detroit lockers are great off-road, not so great for the street. The cheapest option and the most reliable is the spool, which locks the axle shafts together. Good luck driving on the street and not, howling the tires everywhere. It will chirp every time you go around a corner. You'll risk breaking an axle shaft if you're running stock axles on big tires. So beware of the spool. And then finally, kind of the high end is the selectable locker, like an E-locker or an ARB. Those are open differential when you're on the street, and then you flip the switch and they lock up like a spool when you're off-road. Very nice. ARBs are kind of finicky. E-lockers can be finicky. So again, something to consider. They're very expensive. The upside to the ARB is you have an onboard air compressor, which can be handy for other things. But again, you're hauling more weight, more stuff, more things to add weight and complications. So if you're building an off-road Scout, think about gearing, think about traction aids, think about more control stuff. Like I said, transfer case, transmissions. You can get different gear sets for your transfer case. They make a 315 gear set for the Dana 20 or the Spicer 18, which that's considerably lower than factory. There's also a case that we sell that's kind of an in-between. Factory Dana 20 gear is 2.03 to 1. We sell a Dana 20 that's a 2.46 to 1. But it only works in manual transmissions. So I know that half a rotation doesn't sound like much, but it does actually improve the off-road ability quite a bit. My crawler is an automatic. I like the control that the automatic has. So, if you're going to be doing a lot of off-roading, some guys will swear by the manual because they're pretty bomb-proof. They're really hard to break. You can, you get a wide ratio with that deep first gear, and they're slow. You got some crawl ratio. But I personally like the automatic because there's situations where you need to be able to go from 0 miles an hour to 30 miles an hour of wheel speed instantly. And you can't do that with a manual because you're trying to shift gears, and it's tough. So, if you do go with the automatic, you might want to consider those low gears and the transfer case just to help slow you down some. And then like I said before about the lift kit and the tires, the bigger the tire, you pick up some capability, but there's trade-offs. You get too big of a tire, you start breaking axle shafts, you break wheel hubs, you break stuff, you overheat your drivetrain. If you're running an automatic and, kind of tall gears, that torque converter is slipping like crazy to overcome that tire size. So, if you're going to try and run something crazy, you want to run 37s or 40s on your Scout 2, you better have, 538s in the differential to help offset that tire size. I've seen guys do it all the time where they run 37s with 410s, and they're just bouncing off of stuff because they don't have the slow control that you should have. So again, keep that in mind. If you're going to go, like I said, I like on a Scout 2, for example, and even an 80 or 800, if you've got an axle update, 33s really are a good all-around tire. They're good for street. They're good for most off-road. You air them down in the mud or the snow. They do help. You run a 33. I really like 373 or 410, 409 axle gears. That way you can still drive it on the road. You can still do 60. You're not going to do 100. You can still do 60, but you've got a little bit of off-road gear. You've got, some control there. So, but if you're going 35s, you really should run like 456s or 488s. And then 37s, you should be 488 or 513. Just remember, though, if you're running Dana 44s, you start going up in gear ratio, that pinion starts getting smaller and smaller. So you get into the 538, that pinion has like 7 teeth on it. So your contact patch is real small and you run the risk of breaking stuff. So I kind of like that happy medium of the, 409, 410, and the 33, even the 373, if you're doing a lot of street driving. If you're towing with your Scout, you got a venture trailer or some off-road setup, or you're hauling a lot of gear in the Scout. You got a rooftop tent. You got a bunch of shit. Like, really, I would consider the 410 with your 33s. So just think about stuff like that. And then other updates that help that you should, kind of down the line. You don't have to have a winch right off the bat. You don't need a winch if you have self-control. That's a good way to put it. If you can keep yourself from getting stuck on stupid stuff, then you don't necessarily need a winch all the time. But having a winch is super helpful. especially if you're in that early phase where you might have one locker, you're still on 31s, you're wanting to get deeper into the off-road stuff, but you really, you need something. So a winch is a good thing to have. The other thing is don't go wheeling by yourself. Like, really try to have somebody else there with you in their rig. One, for help with recovery, having another set of hands there with repairs or anything like that, because you do run the risk of breaking and damaging things when you're out in the woods. So having another rig there is great for safety, security, and then it's nice to have somebody to share the fun with, take pictures and sit around the campfire, do whatever. Like, it's nice to have another rig there. So that, that's kind of errs on the safety side of things. But, having a winch and knowing how to use it, making sure you have the remote on you all the time, because I know guys that went wheeling and then left the remote in the garage. So, keep that in mind. And then, the final thing is spares. If you're going to spend some time off-road, you really need to make sure you have basic tools. Having like one of our medicine cabinets with your fluids in it, it's super helpful. And then you don't have a milk crate in the back of the Scout that's sliding around everywhere. And then having tie down points in the bed so that you can secure a toolbox, secure parts and pieces. I recommend when you're going into the backcountry, as far as spares go, no matter what, even if you're a stock Scout and you don't plan on doing any wheeling, but you're headed out away from civilization, spare tire, a jack, the tools to remove the tire, a recovery strap that's at least, 20 to 30 feet long. Like I said, fluids, small tool kit with your basics, just so that you can maybe repair something rattles loose, something comes apart, you can still put it back together. A small assortment of nuts and bolts in case something does come apart, some duct tape, some baling wire, some zip ties, that kind of stuff, jumper cables, the basics. Like, don't leave the pavement without some of that stuff. And a lot of that stuff you should have on you anyways, because, sometimes these trucks break down in the Starbucks parking lot and you need a jump or you need whatever. It just happens. So, and then as the rig grows, as it becomes more capable, things to consider carrying are maybe another rear drive shaft, axle shaft, U-joint, maybe another locking hub or a drive flange, a patch kit for your tire. Because, I've been on runs where guys will puncture 2 tires in a run, especially if it's real rocky and you live in an area where the rocks are real sharp. So things like that to consider. Air compressor, onboard air, if you have the ARB, or if you need just a 12-volt air compressor, it's good to have on there. So, so if you look at the whole lineage of the build, look at making the truck more controllable, power steering, power brakes or disc brakes, better gearing, traction aid, safety. Then you look at lift kits, bigger tires or suspension systems that work better, bigger tires, maybe revisit the gearing and the traction aids, spares. Don't forget communication, I guess, in that spares list or the tools list. Make sure your phone's charged up. Make sure you tell people where you're going. Make sure if you've got a CB or an FM radio that you can transmit with, make sure that's charged up and you know how to use it. Make sure if you've got GPS of some sort, make sure you have that. But I guess that's important too. But anyway, those are kind of my things. I didn't mention much about protection as far as skid plates or rock sliders, stuff like that. that is kind of personal preference. I know a lot of these Scouts are real rusty on the bottom, and if they get hit with a rock, so be it. But if you got a nice Scout, you might want to consider some rock sliders just to be safe. They're not foolproof, and they're not the end all of protection. So keep that in mind as well. But yeah, hopefully all that made sense. I'm sure there'll be some people that want to argue with me about certain things, but my experience, that's kind of the progression that it should go in. Don't run out and buy a lift kit and big tires and then complain when your transmission's burned up. But yeah, anyway, thank you for listening. Appreciate you guys. Like, subscribe, share across the platforms. Appreciate it all. Shout out to my dad. Yeah, for everybody, stay warm. And then till next time, I'm Dan from Binder Boneyard.